live stream.
So when are we going to, oh, he is gone. Oh, there you go. So when are we going to get I need to know when I need to start talking.
Okay, let me ask him.
I don't see it. I don't see the TouchPoint Tuesday has started yet on Facebook. So.
Okay.
Oh, actually, yes, it is. Hello, everyone. Welcome in. I hope that you all have been having a good night. Thank you so much. My name is Reginique. I am so excited about this conversation tonight. And so we are going to get started. I want you all to drop into the chat how you're doing tonight. I want you all to let me know how you are. How are you? That's going to be my question. How are you? And I want you all to be as honest as you can about how are you at this time. So we'll give it a few minutes. And my apologies, everyone. I will not be able to see the Facebook stream tonight. So we are actually just going to jump right on in. Like I said, my name is Reginique. I am joined with a few amazing people who are going to help aid in this conversation about mental health. And so I want to give everyone an opportunity to just introduce themselves and just share a little bit about who they are and why they're so passionate about mental health. I'll start. Again, my name is Reginique. I am the director of the counseling ministry here at All Nations. And if you've heard me share before, I am extremely passionate about mental health. I kind of knew that this was something that I wanted to do since I was very young. And I always share that I have a personal experience with mental illness running in my family. And so I kind of saw it up front since a young girl. And so I kind of knew, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to help people like this, or I want to help people who are struggling with mental health conditions. And so that's really my why. And again, my name is Reginique. I'm not sure if anyone wants to take the lead and go next. I see Melanie next, so I'm not sure if you want to go ahead and jump in, Melanie.
That's fine. Good evening, everyone. My name is Melanie Preston, and I am also a licensed clinical therapist and relationship coach and owner of Matter of Focus Counseling with offices in Indiana and in the Atlanta area. So, Reggie, I would say my answer is a little different from yours because I grew up in the South. And in the South, we didn't really have the language for what mental health was. So I knew from an early age, and really it was my mom that kept telling me in high school, you should do something in social services. You should do something where you like helping people, you like listening to people. I didn't want to do that.
Really?
I absolutely did not want to do it. Didn't even know the name for it. Went to college, majoring in business information systems. Hated every moment of it, and finally decided to listen to my mom and fell completely in love with the mind. And then I thought, okay, I have finally found my place because this is who I am all day, every day. So that's really it.
Gotcha. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm not sure if Asia or Chris would like to go next.
Yeah, I can go ahead. And even to piggyback off of what you said, Melanie, yeah, I also never necessarily like wanted to go into the sciences of the mind and whatnot. I'm in human services and always wanted to do that. But I also had, kind of these experiences in childhood and whatnot in my family. And so it was the personal experiences that kind of drove me to want to know more, but also realizing there's so much silence and misconception surrounding like what is the whole mental health thing all about. So I think part of the reason I'm so drawn to this ministry is because this can be the beginning of opening up a conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing.
And hi guys, I guess I'm last. My name is Christopher. I am a third year at Emory University. I'm majoring in psychology and Spanish as a double major. And the reason that I really fell in love with mental health was actually because of my mom. I grew up in a very Caribbean like atmosphere in Queens, New York. So it wasn't very common for us to be speaking about mental health. And very recently, my mom started working in social work, which was her passion for forever, but she never really got the chance to go forward with it. And it definitely like put that emphasis back in my heart for listening and actually seeking out like helping others and stuff like that. So I'm just really excited about mental health now. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing, Chris. And so we have a group of people who are very passionate about really just helping people walk through healing, right, and development, so that we can really live this abundant life, right? And so when we think about what the purpose of our counseling ministry here at All Nations is, it really ties into what Asia said around there's so much stigma and misconception around mental health. And so a lot of times when we hear mental health, what we hear is mental illness, right? But mental health is so much more than mental illness. And so the actual term mental health really just means dealing with how you feel, how you think, and how you behave, right? And so it deals with how you handle stress, how you show up for yourself in terms of self-care, right? How you feel about yourself, how you love other people, how you engage in your relationships, right? And so the fact that you haven't been diagnosed with a mental illness doesn't negate the fact that, okay, I still need to take better care of my mind, my heart, my emotions, that soul care piece, right? And so I think specifically in the Black community, most times what I've found is that we wait until it's sometimes too late to seek help, right? Sometimes we wait until it's like, this is a crisis, this is a life or death situation. And that's when we're like, okay, I really need to look into this. I really need help. And it makes it more difficult for clinicians, right? The work can still be done, but a lot of times clinicians have to come in and they have to really like hit the ground running because you're in such a crisis mode. And so when we think about just like, the way that God designed us, because I do want to provide just some context before we really dive into our conversation tonight. When we think about just the way that God designed us, he designed us spirit, soul, and body, right? And so the soul specifically really is that dimension that allows us to really have relationship with God, with other people, right? Even with ourselves. And so in our soul, right, we're dealing with the soul. It deals with our mind, our emotions, right? Our thinking, how we reason things out, right? This is also where our beliefs lie, right? And our attitudes about life. And so it really enables us to feel, to experience emotions, right? This is also where our memories lie. And so there's so much happening in the soul. And so this need for mental health is so important because it shows up in everything, right? And oftentimes because we are Christ-centered people, because we are Christians, we identify as Christians, we're spirit-led and we should be spirit-led, right? But we should also know how the soul plays a role in that. And so this conversation of mental health is so important. And just so with that being said, specifically in the church, in terms of the mental health ministry, what I've seen is that there are times when we see people who struggle consistently in certain areas of their lives, and we feel like they should have made some type of progress by now. But what we don't understand is that there may be some mental health issues really impacting that person's ability to really function. So specifically in the church, this is why we see a lot of times people float from one ministry to another ministry, seeking help and really trying to pinpoint what's wrong with me, what's happening to me so that I can get some help. But what ends up happening is that the mental health issue is never addressed. And so that person, either they get lost or they end up missing out on the help that they actually need. And this is no one's fault, but sometimes people don't know it's a mental health issue at play. And so that's the purpose of the mental health issue, is really to be able to provide that's the purpose of the mental health ministry, to be able to provide education about mental health and soul care, but also along with development, right? To be able to help people trace their wounds back to where they started, so that they can heal those wounds at the root, and so they can grow and they can be transformed. And so with all that being said, I know I said a lot, but what would you all say mental health or soul care is, and really why it's so necessary for the body of Christ, and anyone can jump in.
I guess I'll go. So mental health. When I think of mental health, I immediately go back to like my high school days or my middle school days, where we learn about like the five aspects of health: the physical, the psychological, emotional, social, and spiritual. And like what we don't realize is that 3 components of that health chart are mental health. Like the emotional, the psychological, and the social. And just the mere fact that like God speaks about like us not forsaking the assembly of ourselves like others do. That's a part of mental health. That's a part of understanding ourselves. And the mental health ministry is kind of here to help you learn how to speak about your feelings, or how to understand your feelings, how to break them down. The interesting thing about this kind of health is the fact that you're not allowed to wear it on your sleeve. Like you can't. Like if you have a physical ailment, that's something that somebody can see. But when it comes to mental health, if you're not speaking about it out loud, you won't be able to express it to someone, because you don't practice being able to have that kind of conversation with someone. So the biggest part of the counseling ministry is to help you learn how to speak about your health and your mental health. One thing that I realized is that people don't really like pity. And I think when we think about like the stigmas of mental health and the different components of it, like immediately we go to depression, or we go to anxiety. And if I start speaking to you about anxiety, or if I start speaking to you about depression, because you've never really heard about it and you don't know how to speak about it, you immediately go to, oh, I feel so sorry for you, or what can I do? How can I help you? And it kind of makes you feel as though, well, maybe something's wrong with me. Maybe I don't need to speak to anybody about this. And what you don't realize is that there are a lot of people that are dealing with these things, and they don't really know. So even going back to what you were saying, like you'll find a lot of people who will come to the altar and ask for a prayer about like a certain situation, when it really is just the fact that they need a counselor. So the counseling ministries is here to help you develop a community and like just learn to speak about how you're feeling, what you're doing with your friends, like talking about how you're feeling or talking about what happened today. Like that's what a counselor wants to do with you, or a trained professional.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Chris.
So I think I'll piggyback off of Chris. I think one of the things I've really dealt with and really recognized is often, especially in church culture, we tend to lump spirit, our spiritual health with our mental health, right? Without understanding that there is that psychological, that mind component. We don't wake up every day in the spirit. That's why there was so much time by, who was it, Paul, that talked about, renewing your mind, right? And putting on the mind of Christ. So why would there be so much time spent always reminding us, hey, don't forget now, absolutely, you need to renew your mind. Look, we're not like Beyonce. We didn't wake up like this. Yeah. So we don't wake up in the holies. So being able to understand that there is this spiritual part of us, and there is this psychological part of us. But this psychological part of us is in this brain of ours, in this physical body, as we walk in this physical space, attempting to be these strangers, right? Attempting to be these foreigners in a foreign land who are attempting to be Christians daily, but without understanding we can't be healthy in our soul if our mind isn't healthy. And to know that all of that ties in together. So you can't say realistically that there is soul care going on if it doesn't include the mind and the soul, and the understanding that these are two different things. And on any given day, my mind isn't stayed on Christ. In my mind, I may be depressed. I may have anxiety, and it's complete. It all has to merge together to care for the holistic body itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Asia,
Yeah, part of what comes to mind for me, even as I hear you talking about like care and holistically and, you know, taking care, the word that comes to mind for me is maintenance, because, you know, we realize that there are like consequences when we don't maintain like really valuable, like, let's say, pieces of machinery that we own, like a car is, you know, the most accessible example. And, you know, the longer you push that car when it needs maintenance, like the longer you push it past that point of need, like the greater the consequence is going to be, up to and maybe including like a breakdown. And so I think just thinking of it more along the lines of like care and maintenance. You know, it's about caring for, you know, what you have and maintaining it to keep it going and to keep it healthy and taken care of. So that's kind of what comes to mind for me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And I wanted to just take a minute just to review some statistics. Sometimes hearing just how many people actually struggle with mental health conditions can really help hone in how important a conversation is. And so the statistics that I'm going to share are from NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. This is from their 2020 report. So 1 in 5 American adults experience mental illness each year. 1 in 20 experience serious mental illness each year, which would be like a psychotic disorder, schizophrenia, things of that nature, or like a bipolar disorder. 1 in 6 youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder each year. 50% of all lifetime mental illnesses begin by age 14 and 75% by age 24. And that really speaks so much, especially to parents who are listening. Be observant about your children, what they're experiencing, how they're expressing their emotions, right? How are their moods normally? Because this is literally saying that 1 in 6 children, was saying 50% of all lifetime mental illnesses present by age 14. So we definitely want to be intentional even about the atmosphere that we're creating inside of our homes, right? And the way that we're having conversations about soul care, about mental health. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 to 34. And I wanted to stop right there just because I know that suicide, mental health specifically, is an uncomfortable conversation. But when you talk about suicide, that is something that we're so reluctant to have that conversation. Sometimes it's this idea that if I bring it up, then, you know, it's going to put it on the person's mind to do it, or simply, I don't know what to do. And so I didn't know if you all wanted to share in on that, but suicide is the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 to 34. And so with that being said, just have conversations with your friends, have conversation with your family members about how they're doing, about how they're feeling, right? Bringing up the conversation. How are you coping? I know that it's been very stressful for you lately. What are you doing to cope? How are you feeling about that? I know that you just recently lost your job. Simple words like that can literally save a life. And so don't be afraid to shy away from those uncomfortable conversations, because it can really save a life. And 1 in 5 US adults reported that the pandemic alone had a significant negative impact on their mental health. And I really want you to think about the people you interact with at church that can be one of these people, right? So these statistics are not people in the world and excluding people in the church. No, these are people that are in our church communities, right? These are people that are in our families who could be impacted. And I feel like sometimes we ignore these topics because we think it's not something that affects us, our homes, our church community, but that couldn't be the furthest thing from the truth. Mental illness, I always say this, and I heard it before, mental health issues already exist within a church. And it's just that, so mental health issues already exist in a church. These are people who are part of our conversation, our congregation, just as we are. I think that people with mental health issues, what research shows that these are actually people that come to the church first, especially when we are a spirit-led people. The very first place that we are going to go to first is our church community. It's just that historically speaking, not at all nations, but just historically speaking, we've kind of taught people how to not talk about these conversations because we won't accept them, right? We keep these conversations out of our church community. And so that kind of brings up the conversation about like stigma, or really just like this shame that we sometimes feel when we're not okay, and we're reading our Bibles, right? And we're praying and we're doing all of these things, but there's still something on the inside of us that's really not doing as well as it could be. And we know that we need some help, right? And so there's still sometimes this shame or this stigma with seeking help. And so I think I want to ask you all, with so many people struggling, why do you all think that there's still so much, and if you think that there's still shame in seeking help, or just simply saying, I'm not okay?
If I can just jump in there, I just think even asking the question is powerful, just because, I know from my experience in, over the years of belonging to church communities, and I don't know, I think this doesn't exactly answer your question, but it does kind of speak to it. I think that there's such an erasing or like a silencing of a part of your identity that happens when you don't feel free to, when you hear the silence around the issue that's affecting you, and you don't necessarily feel free to like put it out there, bring it up. And I'm not even necessarily saying issue like a diagnosis, just like what you're experiencing. Because like when we think about abuse or all the things, addictions and things like that. And when people are coming out of that kind of a situation or out of that kind of a lifestyle, and then you come to a community of faith and you're hearing all kinds of things, but you don't ever hear even these words spoken ever anywhere, I think it can almost feel like a part of your identity is being sent into hiding. So I think even asking the question is powerful.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that, because what it brings up to me is like, there are certain issues that are accepted, right? And it's almost like sometimes and not necessarily just in communities of faith, but in the world, period, there are certain areas of struggle with life that don't seem to be accepted because there aren't conversations happening about it. And so I think that was so powerful that for you to say that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Anyone else wanted to chime in on that?
I think the foundation, the word that keeps coming up is shame, and how we attach that to the words mental health, right? So I think even if we as individuals were to do a better job of just breaking down this stigma of what is mental health, everyone has mental health. The same way everyone has physical health. Sometimes, you go, you get a physical every year with the hope and the intent that your physical health is good. And we talked about the word maintenance. So when we're talking about maintenance, we're trying to make sure that we are maintaining this physical body we have. And if we were to, I think, maybe change our verbiage a little so that it's not this stigma of mental health, but it's your physical health, your mental health. Some days your mental health may be better than others. And then there are some days in which your mental health may have turned into, say, a mental illness, because maybe there are genetic factors, or there has been so much trauma and there is layer on layer on layer. But the reality is, we all have mental health. We all have spiritual health, whether we choose to cultivate it or not. It's still there. So I think it still goes back to those words, the shame of it all. But the shame of it all comes in how we hear it and how often it's said in this way that, has people thinking they're in this box, and nobody wants to be in that box, right? Versus the box of, hey, we're going to get a physical. I'm going to get my emotional health checked out.
Just going off of that, I think it's so funny that like the first kind of phrases that we learn, like when learning our first language or when learning a second language is how are you? And always the response that we learn is good. Like we never really learn to actually say how we're feeling because we're supposed to continue with the rest of the conversation. But the funniest thing to me is that when mental health is being spoken about, on top of the shame, like there's also the shame or the dismissing of that mental health because they say that your prayer life isn't where it's supposed to be, or you're not seeking God the way that you need to. When in actuality, there can still be that kind of lack in your soul because your spirit and your soul are two separate entities. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it's so interesting that you brought up the how are you, right? And I think that we can get, and one of the reasons why I love Pastor Ramsey and Lady K so much is that when they came, one of the first things that they said was, we're going to start asking, how are you? And we want you to be honest in your response. We really want to know, right? And I think that that's so important because a lot of times we just get into the habit of asking people, well, how you doing? How are you, right? Which are two different things. How you doing? How are you? Those are not the same thing. But just getting into the habit of asking people that, and pretty much like Chris said, going on about your business. I'm asking because it's respectful, but I don't really care. And so while at the same time, I think that it's important to be honest about how you are, I also think that when we ask that question, have time to be able, if that person says, I'm not having a good day. Something happened and, I would like to talk about it with someone. Having time and capacity to really be able to sit with that person, right? And offer that empathy, right? Offer, that support. And so I think that that's a lot of times why people sometimes have gotten into the habit of just saying, oh, I'm fine, because they don't feel like people really care. But one of the things that I do, and I can imagine you all do it as well, when I ask people that question, I really want to know, right? I really want to know. And I think that just starting to be a little more intentional and take a little bit more time to ask somebody, how are you? And sit down and really get to know where that person is in their lives. Because at the same time, while we have these conversations about caring for our emotions and things of that nature, there are still going to be people that are reluctant. And so sometimes the transformation is really going to happen in families. And I know that, Melanie can speak to that because I know that you work with, couples and families and things of that nature. A lot of how we develop emotionally really takes place in childhood and in our families. But we'll get to that in a second because we do want to have some time to really talk about families and relationships and things of that nature. And so with that being said, then since, we've kind of talked about why people kind of shy away from seeking help, just to kind of like debunk this idea, this stigma, like what are some of the mental health condition reasons why people seek therapy, right? Not because they're depressed, not because, they've been diagnosed with a severe mental illness. Maybe they're in the middle of a life transition and they need help, or maybe they need help balancing work and life, and they've transitioned into motherhood and they need some tools because it's difficult and they have a baby that they're caring for. And so there are so many reasons why people seek to meet with a counselor, right? A wise counsel. And so what would you all say are some, I guess, non-clinical ways, reasons why people seek therapy?
I would say one of the main two I've seen has been anxiety about returning to the workforce. After
so can you explain that a little?
So, a lot of people when COVID first began, we all had the shelter in place order. Yeah. So many people transitioned to working from home. And many people did that for 1-2 years. I know some people are just now going back full time into an actual office building. So the anxiety around being back in close proximity and, honestly afraid that they may still get sick or they may, get COVID. That's been a huge one. Grief, complicated, unresolved grief as it relates to losing loved ones, losing family, losing friends, and not having that reconciliation, not having that closure of being able to see them or to say goodbye, or even knowing that there was anything wrong. There was a lot of people who are fine today and, get sick, get COVID, and they say they're fine, and you receive a phone call that they're gone. So lots of complicated grief. And third was couples sick of looking at each other in the house and realizing that they had issues that they could no longer run from because they were working at home in the same close quarters.
Yeah. And I didn't even think about the pandemic. And I read one of those statistics about how people reported that the pandemic has such a significant negative impact on their mental health.
Just feelings of isolation.
Exactly. And it lets us know that we were born for community, right? We were not created to just be so isolated. We need human connection, to be one-on-one with someone, because we had Zoom. We had these types of streaming platforms, right? But it still felt like something was missing. There was a disconnection, right? And so those are all very good reasons why people seek therapy. And it's not because, they've been diagnosed with a mental health condition. Did anyone else wanted to add to that?
I imagine just family upset, and I think that can be at any stage of life. It's just like some kind of family upset where you're just like, you want to make sense of it.
Yeah. And I know Melanie probably experiences that quite often. That's a major reason why, especially families go to therapy. How can we better function as a family, right? And what I think is interesting is a lot of times when you see families going to therapy, sometimes what I have noticed, there's been a child that has acted out at school, and that school social worker said, you know what, I'm referring you all to a therapist, and they go to family therapy, and the family is like, this child is the problem. We need you to fix this child. We're just here. Right? There's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with our family. Just fix this child. But as that therapist starts exploring, right, and asking questions, it starts to connect the dots like, okay, this child is modeling behavior that they see at home, or this child has too much power, right? And so I think that there are so many reasons why families go to therapy. And so I'm glad that you actually brought that up, Asia. Thank you. And I wasn't sure if Chris wanted to share anything on that. No? Okay. All right. Yes. And so I think, again, just reiterating, I think way too often we think therapy is just for people who have a mental health condition, but it's so important for us to really understand, that people seek therapy for many different reasons. And it's what I say is always a good time to see a therapist. I would say there are like therapy buzzwords, right? And so one of the most common when my new clients that I have in therapy, one of the most common things that they're seeking to work on, boundaries, right? I have a relationship with my mom. I'm an adult now, and I need to learn how to set some healthy boundaries with my mama. I need to learn how to set some healthy boundaries with my friends. I realize that sometimes the way that I communicate, I harbor things in. And so when I communicate, it's always coming off as anger. And so they'll come and they'll say, I think I have anger issues, right? But when you get down to those primary emotions, what's really happening, right? To really figure out, okay, yeah, there may be some anger, but what is underneath that? There's this feeling of this sense of I feel overlooked, right? Or I'm hurt about something. And so I think that there are really just so many different reasons why people seek therapy. And so I did want to kind of just end the conversation by talking about how our mental health impacts our relationships with others. It's obvious that our mental health impacts our relationships with others. And I think that this is a heavy topic, and I really want to take time to be able to fully dig into this topic. And so we'll actually do that next week. We'll talk really more in depth about specifically relationships. But I did want to at least get the conversation started tonight. And so I think that when we think about mental health, or pretty much like our upbringing, from the way that we were raised, right? So these family systems really, which is just like the way that our family was structured, the way that our family was set up, right? Who was in a home, who wasn't in a home, how we were treated, how our parents responded to conflicts or challenges, how they communicated, or simply how they cared for us and responded to us. These are really those like foundational relationships that really, I heard someone say this and I loved it. It said, these are the foundational relationships that create the blueprint for how we view adult relationships. And so really most of the issues that you see adults struggle with right now are really, they're actually predictive of the type of families we grew up in. If you grew up, in certain families, it's almost like, let's say, for example, we have someone who didn't grow up in a family system where emotions were talked about, right? What does that do? That not only tells me that not only conditions me to believe that emotions are bad, but what do I do as an adult when I experience emotions? Because I can't avoid them. If I'm living, I'm going to experience something that triggers some type of emotion in me. And so sometimes we grow up in these families that really don't provide us with the tools that we need to really be emotionally healthy adults. And I think that if you haven't really acknowledged and addressed like those experiences from your upbringing, not even necessarily going into the conversation of trauma, although we can kind of go into that conversation. I know that trauma, the conversation about trauma is really like a major topic that people have been talking about. And I'm so grateful because it's really like shedding light and on some of the things that we experienced that really were traumatic. But I think that, for us for Black people, I think that so much of what we experience is trauma. Trauma is most likely going to impact someone who, it has a low socioeconomic status. So if you're someone who grew up in an impoverished community, I know that I am, you're more likely going to experience trauma, right? And so the problem is we grow up experiencing these things and we categorize them as normal because it's what we saw. We didn't see anything else. And so I can speak for myself just personally, my dad, and I want you all to be able to chime in to really talk about just like how those family relationships and those family dynamics really shape the way that we engage in relationships. But I know that for me, my dad was schizophrenic. And so I grew up in a home where, everything was around my dad. And so when I was younger, I would think that the reason why I care for people, the reason why I had such this desire to like help people was because I would always have to kind of just like anticipate what type of mood my dad was in, right? Because that was either gonna mean that I was safe or I was unsafe, right? And so being able to kind of just like be that vigilant to be like, okay, how is he today? If he's in a good mood, then I know everything in the family is gonna be okay, right? It's gonna be a good day. But if he's in a bad mood, I don't know what's going to happen. That can cause us to lose a sense of safety, right? And so those things don't just turn off when we become adults, or even when we leave out of the household. If you grew up in a household that was chaotic, where there was constantly something happening, you don't recognize just how harmful those family systems can be until you're out of that environment. And so sometimes I know I can speak for me, God took me out of that environment, right? I graduated, I went on to college and all these things. Immediately when I went to undergraduate, I remember being a freshman in college. I immediately went into a depression and I did not know why. I was going to meet with the college. There's the college counseling center in the college. And I went to them and I was like, I don't know what I'm experiencing. I've never experienced depression. I'm coming from a family where we didn't talk about emotions, so I didn't have language for what I felt. And so sometimes if you don't have the language, then you don't know what you need. And so I think that's so important for us to kind of just be able to label our emotions, to be able to label what we're feeling so that we can process them in a healthy way. But I said all that to say sometimes those relationships or those family systems, we underestimate just how powerful they are, and how sometimes even as adults, we think that we've been healed. We've been in church for years, right? But there are still some lingering effects of the way that we grew up and the things that we've experienced. And so we really have to take time to really do some deep digging and some self-explorations to see, you know, I know that I'm this way. And sometimes I say, I've always been that way, but why am I this way, right? Why don't I like to hang out with my friends? I have a client right now. She's like, I don't like to talk on the phone. People call me, I just ignore the call. I don't like to talk on the phone. And my question is, why? You know, and not saying that that's wrong, but where did you learn that? Where did that come from? And so I think challenging some of our behaviors will really help us to become more self-aware. And so what would you all say are some of the, you know, just some of the different ways that, you know, those experiences can present in adulthood? And Melanie, you can start, because I know that you work with, you know, couples and families, things of that nature.
I would say one of the examples, well, first thing, I think most often we think because we live through it and we're older, it's a done deal. You know, we often will talk about the trauma, we will talk about possibly the things that happen, but it's more of a I'm good attitude. You know, oh, that's over, been there, done that. And so, you know, if we really want to put the vocabulary to that, anything that's 18 and under, we call ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, right? But even when we get past our ACEs, even when we get past the age of 18, there are still things that are happening. Mm-hmm. Right. And all of those things, all of the trauma, all of the bad relationships, the previous marriage that didn't work, the loss of a child, the hurt that we've experienced, it all makes us who we are today. Right. So, for example, to look at me now has no bearing on who I really am. And so often I'll ask couples, what do you really know? What do you know about your partner's childhood? Just tell me what you know, you know, and they'll start talking. Oh, I know she grew up in a home with both parents. Mom came from a very affluent home. Both parents worked. They traveled the world. They really didn't do a lot of hugging, but they bought her everything, right? In my mind, and I'll usually say, I have created this avatar. It's like a little picture woman over here. And I start saying, okay, tell me what you know about that situation. How did it affect her that her parents didn't show her love, right? That they only gave her gifts. Or even when you hear individuals who now as adults say things such as, well, fine, just leave.
Go into that a little bit.
When you really start to talk to them, usually, and now mind you, these are the same individuals that will have disclosed that they've lived past whatever is in the past. However, when you really start talking to them about, do you want the person to leave? No. Well, why do you keep saying it? Because everybody leaves. My daddy left.
Yes.
My mama left. You know, that boyfriend that I lost my virginity to, or that I thought was going to marry me, they all left. You know, so there are so many ways it shows up, and we think we're good, and we don't understand. Another good example that's a really touchy subject is past sexual trauma, right? But then you're not able to a partner may not be able to understand why a wife doesn't like to be touched, or why, the thought of people being in their personal space is an issue, or even maybe why intimately they're not interested. Well, ma'am, sir, it's, if sexual trauma has happened, there's a great chance, even if the person doesn't realize it, they don't even equate sex, the act of, to love. It's a job. It is something that has been taken from them.
Yeah. Right.
And I know that is one that is such a hurtful and deep, dark topic. So sometimes you'll have a partner that doesn't even know. They don't know why you're standoffish or why you don't like people to be close to you, because you've not disclosed your past. Because again, there's that word, shame. And often when we figure out what our trauma is, we blame ourselves. And so then to bring it up says, I should have known better. So we move forward we put our makeup on, Chris, we put our nice shirts, we put our collar shirts on, and we show up and we present in this way that says, I'm here and I'm all together. Not true. Because most often we have not done enough digging into the past of the people around us. And it's not even just about people that we're in romantic relationships with. It carries over with anyone we come in contact with.
Yeah.
So that is, I could park right there, but that is, that's a thing.
And there's so much there. And that's why I said that we really want to have enough time to really get into that conversation. And so we will be able to kind of spend a little more time there, but I definitely wanted to give everyone else just an opportunity if you did want to kind of share some of the things that you've noticed.
I immediately started thinking about rejection and connection to abandonment. I definitely know of the fact that sometimes it's hard to let go of people that we know we need to let go of, because we feel like that is rejection, or we feel like, once again, that person is leaving us, and we don't know how to deal with those kind of emotions. And just another aspect of, not being able to express yourself, having been like enclosed and boxed in for your entire life. And now you're an adult and you have the ability to express yourself how you feel. And it sometimes can be a lot for you to understand, or a lot for you to take in, because you don't know what to do with this freedom. And I've grown up in New York City. Like even when I'm out with my friends, sometimes I find that, like, if there are large crowds, like, I don't want to be there, because I'm just so used to, if there's a large crowd, something's gonna go down. So sometimes it's not even just your friendships and your romantic relationships. Sometimes it's what you've seen happen, like, in spaces around you. One thing that I've always heard is that, like, the best lessons are taught through experiences, and, like, lessons aren't always a good thing. Lessons are not always a good thing. Sometimes, literally, like, you going through certain traumas have embedded, like, unquestionable rules inside of your head. That just the same way that you don't think about your name is the same way you don't think about why you act this way.
Chris, that is so good. I feel like we could just stay here and talk about this all night, literally. I think that is so good. And you know what, that really creates belief systems. And what happens is, when we have this set of rules, right, that we have come up with in our own minds based on our own experiences, a lot of times when we experience something in the future, we automatically go back to that rule. Or if there's an emotion that is evoked, we automatically tie that emotion to something that we've experienced in the past. And a lot of times when we respond to that emotion, we respond in a way that's not warranted based on that experience. And so a lot of times I have clients who I'm working with, and they come and they say, I experienced something and I feel like I overreacted about something, or I had this experience and I'm upset because I yelled at my boyfriend or my husband or whoever it is, and I don't know why I did it. And so a lot of times what I have to do is go back, because what that really is triggers, right? It's really triggers. And so we really want to make sure, I think Melanie kind of tapped on it, really taking time to dig deep, to really deal with the things that we've experienced and how those things are showing up, even if we're not able to pinpoint behavior, but how is it showing up in my mind as a belief system? And so I think that it's so important for us to just continue to talk about things like that. And that really ties into this idea of emotional regulation. When I respond to something, why am I responding to that this way? And what does it remind me of in the past, right? This experience that I'm experiencing now, what does it remind me of? Have I ever felt this way before, right? And it's tied to a lot of times to traumas. And so sometimes it really takes, when you are triggered, kind of taking a step back and processing that and responding and not reacting. And so that's something that I really try to teach clients, because we really want to be able to process our emotions in a healthy way. That's such a huge reason for why people come to therapy, just being able to process emotions. And Asia, I wasn't sure if you wanted to share.
Yeah, I mean, as you were just saying all that, I think just to kind of tie in like what I've heard from everybody is just like, yeah, you're having these disproportionate reactions to things, like, and I think unfortunately, like, that can go on for an untold amount of time, because sometimes it has to be like a catalyst. There has to be some interrupting factor that kind of like interrupts your reality. And kind of, because it is your normal, kind of like what Chris talked about, especially if it's volatility, it's emotional volatility that you're displaying, and that's what you kind of like grew up in, and that's how you're supposed to respond to triggers. You don't have that word for it, but it was modeled for you that you're supposed to, like, fill in blank here. And so yeah, it can be so hard. That's why I think it's so important, I guess, again, to just go back to the whole maintenance idea. It's so important for people to just allow them, like, give themselves the gift of time and space with someone who they can just talk to and unpack things, and just because that might end up being a saving grace for them. That might end up being the thing that kind of begins to open up a new like understanding or a new realization of like, or even helps them begin to even question things that up till then were like entirely the norm. So yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking about it.
Yep. Thank you so much. And so I know that we talked about a few different things today, but we really wanted to just lay some of the groundwork for basic mental health. And so next week, we'll really focus on relationships, right? And so, but I didn't want to end the live without sharing tips for recovery, right? So if we have someone listening and they're like, you know what, I want to better my mental health. I want to kind of maybe start doing this digging, doing some of this soul care work that you all have been talking about. I guess what would be some of the tips, that you would give to, or even words of encouragement that you would share to someone who's saying like they want to take better care of their mental health? And anyone can go ahead and jump in first.
So I have a couple.
Okay.
Just thinking, people share with people who share. So if you're taking the time to express how you're feeling to me, of course, not doing too much, because of course sometimes it can be a lot if you're not a trained professional. But if you're sharing how you're feeling with me, you're making me more comfortable with you to share how I'm feeling. I think that kind of opens the door so that mental health doesn't seem as taboo as it does. There's also talking to yourself. I kind of call talking to myself my reconstruction, like, because it is giving me a chance to really understand how I'm feeling, or how I'm like seeing everything at a foundational base, or at a foundational standpoint. And with that, you'd be able to understand, yeah, like I need to talk to somebody about this, or this is something that I'm willing to keep and build upon. Because if the foundation is rusty, if the foundation is shaky, then you won't be able to um, move forward, or be able to have a good, stable mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else want to share?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, so I know folks have just had a variety of experiences, and like I said earlier, sometimes you just don't even know, like, or you just don't, you're not thinking about it or whatever. But I had two books that I just wanted to kind of share with folks, because these two books like really helped me to, particularly if it's someone who feels like they may have had an abusive past somehow. And the reason I say it that way is because sometimes you don't even name it that way, or you just don't even know, But if you suspect that that may have been a part of your past, I'd like to recommend this book. It's called Bold Love by Dr. Allender. Anything by him really is he's a Christian therapist, and just like it just really just gets to the heart of like everything. And then Boundaries, which folks may have heard of, by Dr. Cloud. Because inevitably, if folks have had experiences with any kind of violation, abuse is really just the ultimate violation of boundaries. So I think this book can really be useful for anybody, really. So those would be my two recommendations. And then one more is a podcast, a series of podcasts by a doctor named Dr. Leaf, Dr. Caroline Leaf, who folks might have already heard of. And she makes trauma very practical, gives you very practical things that you can do to like unlearn some thought processes. So those would be my three recommendations.
Mine would be, first of all, give yourself grace to understand that you have the right to feel however it is you feel. And I think also in understanding everyone is not going to start this journey and want to see a therapist, right? But even if that's not the case, at least have one person, have one person in your life that you have the freedom to be all of who you are, right? That person who you can be the Christian, you can be the gangster, you can be all things with, and you have the right to say, this sucks. No, I am not okay. And let's just say, for example, you're listening and you say, well, I don't have any of those people. I don't have any of those things. Write it down.
You took mine.
Either write it down. I tell, put a voice memo in your phone. Look in the mirror, but find a way to get it up and out. Being able to start being honest with self. I always say, be true to thine own self, right? That's something we've heard time and time again, but really tapping into that. If you can't be honest with anyone else, be honest with yourself and start to own you and recognize that you deserve that.
Yeah.
You deserve it.
I think that, so I was actually going to also say journaling. I have clients who I see in therapy, and some people that come to me, they've suppressed how they felt so long. They've gone with saying, I'm okay, nothing's wrong with me, right? Not being true to themselves, so much so to the point where they don't even know themselves anymore. They don't know why they do what they do. They don't know why they show certain behaviors. And so sometimes I say journaling, being true, right? Journaling how you feel for real. Like if you don't have anybody that you're able to say, you know what, I really didn't like when this happened to me, or I really just need to talk to somebody about this. If you don't have someone who you can share that with, getting in your journal and being and telling the truth about where you are, and just allowing yourself to really experience those emotions and process those emotions, it's so helpful. And it really helps you start to tap back into those emotions, because I think one of the things that we do, sometimes we can just be existing, and sometimes we experience so much trauma, we can become numb. And so it's not that we're not just not experiencing like maybe overwhelming emotions, or I would say quote unquote negative emotions. We're not experiencing any emotions at all, right? And so sometimes people are like, I don't feel at all, right? And so that's a problem. You should be able, you're a human being with a soul. You should be able to feel. And so I think that sometimes journaling sometimes can help you tap back into how you're feeling and what's actually happening to you in that moment. And you want to live from that space, because that's a space of truth and authenticity. And you really want to be able to live from that space. And so that's some things that I would say. Another thing that I would say, sometimes I have my clients do this in therapy, especially when we're talking about the conversation of families, and people are like, well, I don't know what's been passed down. I don't know. I know how I am, I know how I feel, I know how I act, but I don't necessarily know if that's something that's been passed down. Sometimes being able to get you a blank piece of paper and drawing your grandmother, your mom, your dad, all of these people in your family, right? From beginning to end, as long as you can remember, how are their relationships? How did they act? How did they respond to experiences and all of these different things? Because it gives you a visual image. And so you can really say, I see why I act like this. My grandmother act like this, or, my grandmother struggled with anxiety. And so sometimes it's being able to trace that back and visualize some of those patterns in your family system. And then you can make an informed decision. And sometimes I tell clients, sometimes we uncover things in therapy. We talk about some things and we hit a truth, and that truth comes out, but not all the time are people ready to walk in that. And I don't think we talk enough about just how sometimes overwhelming it can be to kind of acknowledge certain truths. It's difficult, and that's why we avoid them for so long. That's why we have defense mechanisms, right? And so that's definitely something that I wanted to add as well. And so I just wanted to end with saying thank you so much to everyone who stayed, and to everyone who participated in this conversation. I think that it was so necessary. And I know that we talked about a good bit of things, and I'm hoping that we can continue the conversation. And even if there was something that was mentioned tonight that we didn't necessarily talk about, just knowing that there's space for whatever it is that you're struggling with. Like, you're not the only person that struggled with that. And so it's okay to reach out for help. And so if you are in need of some support, if you're saying, you know what, I want to find a therapist, or I want to connect with one of the processing groups at All Nations Atlanta, you can certainly reach out to us at counseling@allnationsatlanta.com, just so that we can be there for you and connect you with the resources and support. Or even if you just need a neutral person who's going to be confidential, who's just going to be a listening ear, we can provide that as well. And so I did want to let everyone know that. And before we ended, I did want to mention just our giving information. Thank you again so much to everyone who joined in with us tonight. And we would love for you to partner with us through giving. So you can text ANWATL and the dollar amount to 77296, or you can visit allnationsatlanta.com if you would like to give. Thank you so much. I pray that you all received something tonight, and there was some type of insight or wisdom that was shared that you can take and apply to your own personal and individual lives. So thank you so much for everyone. Even our guests, thank you all for pouring out tonight. I really appreciate it. Y'all have a good night. Bye-bye.